You have already met her. You just do not know her name. Almost no one does, because 1,000 years after she reshaped the imagination of an entire civilization, we still cannot tell you what her mother called her. She lived in a wooden palace in a city that does not exist anymore. The city was called Heian-kyo, the capital of peace and tranquility, and today you would call it Kyoto. Picture the year 1008, lamplight on lacquer, the rustle of many layers of silk. A woman kneels at a low writing table, grinding an ink stick against a wet stone, and she is about to begin a book so strange for its moment that historians still argue over what to even call it. She is a lady of the court. Her rank is middling. Her father is a scholar of Chinese poetry who once complained, out loud, that his brilliant child had been born the wrong sex. In her world, Chinese was the language of men, of government, of serious thought. A well-bred woman was supposed to keep her eyes down and her learning hidden. So how does a woman with no recorded name, forbidden the important language, end up writing the book that a modern novelist would recognize instantly as the ancestor of everything they do? That is the mystery. Stay with it. We call her Murasaki Shikibu. Both parts of that name are borrowed. Shikibu points to an office her father held in the Bureau of Ceremonial. Murasaki, meaning the purple of the Cromwell root, is a nickname taken from a character inside her own novel. Think about that for a moment. The name we know her by was lent to her by a woman she invented. Her real name slipped through the record like water through open fingers, and it is gone. But her mind is not gone. That survived in full. To understand what she made, you have to stand inside her cage first. The Heian court, roughly the years 794 to 1185, was one of the most refined and most claustrophobic worlds ever built. A noble woman of high birth lived behind screens and blinds and folding curtains. She was rarely seen, even by the men who courted her. Her face was a rumor. Her power, and it was real power, moved through paper. Everything ran on poetry. A suitor did not knock. He sent a poem, 31 syllables, written in a careful hand on scented paper, sometimes tied to a sprig of blossom chosen to match the season and the mood. The reply was judged on everything at once: the words, the handwriting, the paper, the flower. Get any of it wrong and you are finished before you began. Can you imagine a world where your entire romantic life is decided by your penmanship? Here is the twist that made the miracle possible. Because Chinese was reserved for men, the women of the court wrote in the native Japanese soundscript, a flowing set of syllable signs known as kana. The men dismissed it. They called it, with a sneer, women's hand. And in that dismissed, underestimated, supposedly lesser script, the women of Heian did something the men, chained to imported forms, could not. They wrote Japanese as it was actually felt. They wrote longing and boredom and jealousy in the rhythm of their own tongue. The tool that was meant to keep them small became the tool that set them loose. Now the clues start to gather. Around this time, Murasaki loses her husband, a court official much older than her, after only a few years of marriage. She is a young widow with a small daughter, and in her grief and her long empty hours, she begins to write a story. Not a poem, not a diary, a story with invented people that keeps going, chapter after chapter, following one man through his whole life. His name is Genji. He is the son of an emperor by a low-ranking, much-loved concubine. He is impossibly beautiful, impossibly gifted, and, because of his mother's low rank, quietly pushed to the edge of the throne he can never take. The book follows his loves, his exiles, his triumphs, his slow slide into age and loss, and then, astonishingly, it keeps going after he dies, into the tangled lives of the next generation. 54 chapters, roughly 400 characters, a single continuous world. And people could not stop reading it. This is where the story of the writer and the story of Japan collide, because Murasaki's chapters did not stay private. They spread through the court by hand, copied and passed and whispered about, and they reached the most powerful man in Japan. His name was Fujiwara no Michinaga. To understand him, forget the emperor for a second. In Heian, Japan, the emperor reigned but often did not rule. The real machine was the Fujiwara family, and they ran it with a strategy so simple it is almost shocking. They married their daughters to emperors. A Fujiwara daughter became empress, her son became the next emperor, and the little boy emperor's grandfather, the Fujiwara patriarch, governed in his name. Power passed not through the sword but through the marriage bed and the nursery. Michinaga was the master of this game, and in the year 1006, he brought Murasaki Shikibu into the household of his daughter, the young Empress Shoshi. Why would the most powerful man in Japan want a widowed storyteller in his daughter's rooms? Here is the false resolution, the answer that feels right and is only half true. You might guess he simply loved literature, that he was a patron of the arts. He was. But look closer at the game he was playing. An empress needed to hold the emperor's attention. She needed a salon, a court within the court, dazzling enough that the young emperor would rather be in her rooms than anywhere else, because the longer he lingered, the sooner there would be a son, and a son was everything. Wit was a weapon, brilliance was strategy.
A woman writing the most talked-about story in the capital was not a decoration in that salon, she was artillery. And there was a rival salon to beat. Because Murasaki was not the only genius in that palace generation. In the rooms of a different empress served a woman named Sei Shonagon, sharp as a blade, who wrote a book of her own, the Pillow Book, a glittering, opinionated scrapbook of lists and observations and takedowns. The two women almost certainly never sat together, but Murasaki knew exactly who she was. In her private diary, she left a few lines about Sei Shonagon that drip with cool contempt, calling her dreadfully conceited, sure that a woman who flaunted her cleverness so openly would come to nothing good. So we have a widow, a rival, a scheming patriarch, and a book spreading like fire. And this is the moment to remember the mystery we opened with. How does a woman with no recorded name write the ancestor of the modern novel? You now have the setting, you do not yet have the answer, because a talked-about court romance is not by itself a revolution. Plenty of cultures produced long tales of handsome heroes in their lots. Here is what Murasaki actually did. Here is the real revelation. She wrote the inside of a person. Read the older stories that came before her, and the characters are mostly types, the brave one, the beautiful one, the wicked one. Read Murasaki and something new is happening on the page. Her people contradict themselves. Genji is generous and selfish in the same breath. He loves genuinely and wounds carelessly. The women around her are not prizes, they are mines, each with her own disappointment, her own held-back anger, her own private calculation about how to survive in a world that gave her almost no room to move. Murasaki does not tell you a character is sad. She lets you feel the weather of their mood turn, page by page, the way it turns in a living person. That is the thing we now call psychological realism, and she was doing it 1,000 years ago, before the word novel existed in any language. And running under all of it is a single feeling, one so central to the book that it became central to Japan. The Japanese later gave it a name, mono no aware, the gentle ache of knowing that beautiful things pass. The cherry blossom is precious precisely because in a week it will be gone. Genji's world is drenched in this. Every triumph carries the shadow of its ending. Every love is already quietly a goodbye. That feeling did not stay inside the book. This is the invisible inheritance, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. That ache Murasaki poured into Genji became a permanent setting in the Japanese heart. It is why every single spring, millions of people still stop what they are doing to sit under blossoming cherry trees and watch the petals fall. Hanami, flower viewing, is not only a party, it is a national ritual of loving something because it is about to disappear. When you see those photographs of pink trees and upturned faces, you are looking at Murasaki Shikibu's emotional world, still running 10 centuries downstream. And the loop we left open at the very start, the woman you had already met without knowing her name, closes here. If you have ever felt a small pull of sadness at something beautiful and brief, a sunset, a last day of summer, a face in a train window, then you have already met her, in a sense. She helped teach a civilization to feel that way on purpose, and to call it beauty rather than loss. The book almost did not reach you across that gulf of time. For centuries, the Tale of Genji lived mostly inside Japan, studied, illustrated on hand scrolls, quoted, revered. Then in the 1920s and 30s, an English scholar named Arthur Waley translated it, and the wider world met Genji for the first time and reeled. Here was a full, psychologically modern novel, written by a woman, at a moment when much of the rest of the world was centuries away from anything like it. We still cannot tell you her name. We are not fully certain of the year she died. The records give us only a fog somewhere in the early 11th century. Parts of her life are guesswork stitched from her own diary and a scatter of court records. The woman herself stayed behind the screen, exactly as her world demanded. But she left the screen open just wide enough. She proved that the whole inner life of a human being, the contradictions, the self-deceptions, the quiet grief under the silk, could be caught and held on paper. Every novelist who has ever tried to show you what it feels like to be someone else is walking a path she cut first, in a borrowed script, under a borrowed name, in a city that is now only a memory beneath modern Kyoto. So here's the question to sit with. Her greatest creation was not the emperor's son. It was the simple, staggering idea that a fictional stranger could feel as real and complicated as you do. The next time a book makes you ache for a person who never existed, you might ask yourself who first taught you that this was possible, and whether it troubles you at all that we can thank her for so much, and still cannot say her name.